What happens when two bass road warriors spend quality time talking music and life with one of their peers? Bassist, educator, author David C. Gross and bassist and head honcho of KnowYourBassPlayer.com, Tom Semioli, trade dates with the legends of rock, jazz, funk, blues, folk, country, and more. Notes from an Artist, revealing conversations with the legends who've created the soundtrack of our lives. What happens? You're about to find out. It's another episode of Notes from an Artist.
And David, let's welcome our listener to yet another wonderful episode of Notes from an Artist.
I love having an audience.
Yes, I do too. And the audience could be listening to this on Cygnus Radio, www.cygnusradio.com, or they could be listening to it on our podcast. And David, you know our podcast is available on Apple, Amazon, Buzzsprout, and everybody loves Spotify.
It's true, except for you and I, of course.
Right, and just about everyone else we talk to, it seems. But you can listen to us on Spotify and wherever podcasts are podded. Now, David, tonight our guest is an artist you heard, but you don't know the name. This is probably one of the reasons why you and I started such platforms as Know Your Bass Player and Bass Guitar Channel Radio. And our guest is Stanley Sheldon. He is a bass player. He is from Ottawa, Kansas, and he still lives in that state. And we talked to him from his home state. And Stanley Sheldon anchored probably among the two most influential guitarists of the 1970s. One is a superstar and one sort of sunk into cult status. That would be Peter Frampton. We all know Peter Frampton from Humble Pie and his great solo career. And of course, the late, great Tommy Bolin, who made seminal sides with Billy Cobham, the James Game, Deep Purple. Unfortunately, he died young from the rock and roll lifestyle, but he would have been a superstar had he lived. Stanley was the bass player on Frampton Comes Alive, and that is probably the seminal, I'll use that word again, live album of the 70s, at least the mid-70s, along with the Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore, Thin Lizzy live, The Who live at Leeds. Can you think of any other important 70s live?
Oh, I think in the Peter Frampton realm, we have to call Humble Pie live at the Fillmore.
How could I forget that? Yes, Peter Frampton live, right, another great influential.
And then, of course, Sinatra at the Sands.
Sinatra, wasn't that the 60s? I don't know.
Yes, it was. But the thing about that record is most jazz schools, if you believe it or not, utilize that because the Count Basie Orchestra, which all arrangements by Quincy Jones, is one of the penultimate live recordings of a big band.
Wow. And what does the word penultimate mean, David?
It means something like seminal. But is it seminal or is it seminal? I'm not sure.
Yes, our reproductive portion of the show. Anyway, not only was Stanley Sheldon a bass player with Frampton and Bolin and all those other folks, he was a pioneer of the fretless bass in a rock and roll context, along with your favorite bass player, Boz Burrell of Bad Company, Kenny Passarelli, of course, Rick Danko, and friend of the show, Bill Wyman.
Yes, indeed.
So, yes, we'll talk to
the first fretless player in rock and roll.
Okay.
At least that we know of.
Well, I think you could safe to say, yeah, Bill Wyman yanked the frets out of his famous bass in the early 60s, so he gets the nod for the first fretless bass player. Aside from Peter Frampton, you've heard Stanley Sheldon with Roger McGuinn, Lou Gramm of Foreign of Fame. He substituted for Mel in Grand Funk Railroad, Mel Schachter.
Yes, he did, and he enjoyed that very much.
Yes, he talks about that. We'll get into that with him. He's also played with Delbert McClinton, Larry Carlton, Joe Bonamassa, Albert King, Sonny Landreth, Warren Hayes, Warren Zevon. Guitar players like Stanley Sheldon. He was in a band called Ronin with Waddy Wachtel, Rick Marotta, and Doug Moore. So for you, those of you who read album credits, you know those are studio heavies. Stanley's had a very diverse career. He is still on the bandstand with a band called Vinyl Machine, which is a repertory ensemble. And you know what else is interesting? Just like friend of the show, Tony Levin, Stanley is an early blogger. He liked to document his musical adventures online long before it was fashionable. So we've had two blog innovators, both Tony Levin and Stanley Sheldon are both great bass players.
Yeah, and I think at this point in time, it's no longer blog, Tom. It's vlog because everyone's videoing it. So welcome to the 21st century.
Welcome. We're kicking and screaming to the 21st century. So let's get to our interview with Stanley Sheldon. And folks, stay tuned because directly after the interview, after we say our goodbyes and kiss each other, there is a fabulous Stanley Sheldon playlist, which David has comprised. And it's all those artists we've mentioned, and more. Here's Stanley Sheldon. Let's go.
There he is, Stanley Sheldon. Hello, Stanley.
Hi, Tom.
How you doing? There's David to my left, or your right, or whatever it is.
Can we all see each other now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
You're in the great state of Kansas?
That's exactly right. Lawrence, Kansas, home of basketball. We invented it.
You invented college hoop.
That's
As a matter
right.
of fact, I think I played the college in Lawrence.
Yeah. Well,
And if I remember, there was nothing open after our gig. We were starving till morning.
it's probably a Monday night. It's probably changed a lot in the last, I don't know when you were there, but
Oh, it had to be 40 years ago.
it's like any college town. But back then, it was pretty sleepy still.
Yeah. By the way, Peter Barron says hello.
Oh, cool.
All
Give
right.
him my best.
I will.
Is Kansas a dry state?
No, it's interesting, though. Where I grew up just south of here is where John Brown, the famous abolitionist, murdered a family, and that's the Civil War broke out. They call out this borderline here between Missouri and Kansas called Bloody Kansas, and this is where the Civil War started, right here, because
Wow.
Unbelievable.
it was a fight over whether Kansas was going to be a slave state like Missouri was,
Wow.
and we
Wow.
didn't want that. I was on the good side.
Now, you lived in New York, you lived in L.A. What made you go back to Kansas? I mean, obviously, that's where you're from.
Well, Tom, it's like I've lived in a few different places, like L.A., New York, and then a few years back, maybe a decade, I moved to Nashville for a little while, and I went on the road. I was playing with Delbert McClinton, and you had to live there to get on the bus every Thursday night to go do his one gig a week. So, and then after that ended, Peter was in Nashville.
Right, that's right.
And I had to get on the bus in Nashville there. But between Delbert and Peter, I decided I was just going to come back home to where I'm most, it's where I grew up. I love it here.
Yeah.
Joe Vitale, who we're doing a project together right now, the great drummer Joe Vitale.
Vinyl Machine.
Yeah. And so Joe has always lived in Ohio, where he's from, Kent State, Canton, Ohio. And so I'm kind of like Joe. I just like to be at home. I'm comfortable here.
Well, the cool thing is now you don't have to live in L.A. or New York or Nashville. You can live wherever you want. Yeah.
That's so true. Back in the day, we had to migrate if we wanted to get any kind of attention anywhere.
Right. And you guys were in Colorado. Well, David, let's talk about Stanley Sheldon. What a career you've had. Okay, he's a bass player, he's a composer, he's an educator. Not only has he worked with Delbert McClinton, but I have, let's see my list, Warren Zevon, Joe Bonamassa, Lou Gramm, right? You did work with Warren Hayes, Albert King, Larry Carlton. You pinch hit for Mel Schachtner and Grand Funk Railroad. Man, that's some heavy.
That's been
right
fun. That's been really fun. To play with Don Brewer on drums is something to be.
Wow.
You got to see it to believe it.
I've seen. Yeah. And then, of course, Steve Lukather, Roger McGuinn. You did Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke, one of the most important films of the 20th century, David.
Yes, as a matter of fact, that's one of Fellini's favorite movies, by the way.
I didn't know that.
Joe Fellini, not
Joe
not
Fellini, who lives down the block from him. Yeah. Hey, Joe. And of course,
what's funny? No, go ahead.
Stanley anchored probably two of the most influential, among the most influential albums of my generation was Frampton Comes Alive, of course, and Tommy Bolin's Teaser. You're in the right place at the right time. Now, Stanley, I have to thank you because I started off as a classical guitar player, and you can't meet girls playing classical guitar. At least I couldn't anyway. So as the classical
You
guitar...
have trouble doing it playing bass. So
I do. Well, that's another story. But classical guitar is the same technique as the electric bass. And that was 1975, 76. And I had to learn how to play electric bass. So what did I do? Got this album. And then, David, back in those days, they had a thing called the gatefold. Okay. I don't know if you remember.
No seeds?
No seeds in there. No. So, but look at this guy with his bare chest. His bass has no frets on it. And I was like, what the heck?
That's the way it should be, Tom.
Is that right? Stanley, it's very interesting because this record was pretty much pre-Jocko. The world didn't know about Jocko then. So the fretless bass was really off the radar. But it was you, it was Kenny Passarelli, and Boz Burrell were all playing fretless bass.
Don't forget Freebo.
And Freebo. Okay, yes, got to get Freebo in there.
And the first bass player I saw using one was a few years prior to that. When we did Comes Alive, Jocko, released that first he became the bass player in Weather Report that same 76.
Yes.
So I knew about him, but he was like the pinnacle of what fretless player could do. I mean, Jaco, to this day, he's still considered like the greatest ever on electric bass, and I sure do. There's some others that have come along. I forgot where I was going with that, but anyway. Oh yeah, Rick Danko was the first bass player I saw.
Right, of course, yeah.
With a fretless.
Yeah, that Ampeg.
Yep, that's right.
Well, it's an interesting thing, Stanley, because both you and I purchased fretless basses in 1969. What was your reason for doing it?
It was just one of those things. Fender issued it that year, I believe. That's the first year it was issued, and that was the first time I think I'd seen one hanging on a rack. Other than Ampeg did have one earlier, but it was a little bigger. It was more like a baby bass, what we call. And I have a baby bass that I use for salsa gigs. It's like an upright built in Puerto Rico, modeled after that original Ampeg. But when I saw the Fender Precision fretless, it was just so the look of it, the feel of it. I just had to have one, and I didn't even know if I had the ear to play it in tune. But I started working at it, with Tommy Bolin early on, and we were playing fusion music, and it was a perfect vehicle to apply to the fusion concept. I had a lot more latitude with Tommy than I did with Peter. With Peter, I just kind of played a note and just played it in tune, and no sliding like you hear a lot of fretless. Tony Franklin is really a great player. He's another one. Boz Burrell, that's his last name, right? Burrell?
Yes, yes. Bad Company, yeah.
He and I were kind of contemporary, doing the same thing. He didn't elaborate much with the notes either. He just tried to play it in tune. Chris Kimsey told me, Chris Kimsey used to laugh at me. He said, yeah, sometimes he wasn't. But I think he had to struggle a little more than some. And I was, I have to be very focused when I play the fretless because I have to make sure it's in tune. And for that reason, I'm not playing it as much these days because it's too demanding. I have to be so focused. That night of Frampton Comes Alive, I was used to playing the fretless every day for the last 4 or 5 years.
Sure.
So I was really kind of used to it at that point.
Yeah.
Well, what made you go from, because if I recall, the original Precision fretless was rosewood.
Right. I just had them both. I like both the maple and the rosewood. I was with Frampton. I could get any bass I wanted, basically.
Sure.
And just came with dinner. So that was great.
But your career started off in 1966. You had a band called the Lost Souls in Ottawa, Kansas. What was it like to have long hair in 1966 in Ottawa?
Well, that's funny. I got kicked off the wrestling team because I wouldn't cut my hair. And you've heard this story from a million musicians that I getting kicked out of high school. Tommy Bolin got kicked out of his high school at Sioux City when he was only 16, and that's when he moved to Colorado. Right. I didn't get kicked out. They just kicked me off the wrestling team. So I got to graduate in 68, and then I hightailed for Colorado. My cousin and I were both playing in the Lost Souls. Right. My cousin Tom Stevenson, we kind of were the two members of that early garage band that went on to do stuff. My cousin, we moved to Colorado together and played with Tommy Bolin together. And then Tom Stevenson, my cousin, jumped ship and joined Joe Walsh and Barnstorm, who were also in Colorado. So it was really incestuous back then in that town. I mean, everybody was switching players and switching chairs. And so Kenny Passarelli left Tommy and went and played with Walsh. And then my cousin, and that left a spot for me with Tommy. Right. And then my cousin left Energy and went to play with Joe Walsh. And later on, my cousin played with Paul Butterfield and Rick Danko and Friends, that tour they did. My cousin was the keyboard player on that. So we were both, he was my cousin, and we were more like brothers growing up, our mother's sisters. And we grew up just loving blues and boogie woogie style stuff, because Tom's dad had a really great collection. So we learned young.
At what point did you think this was going to be a career for you?
Well, I was a little nervous about it, but I kind of decided right then and there after leaving, graduating high school, that much to my parents' dismay, and not that they discouraged me, they just were worried,
Sure.
Really? And I was, secretly worried too, but I was too dumb to be scared when I moved to Colorado. That changed everything. I got to meet Tommy Bolin, and that's when after Tommy did that album with Billy Cobham from the Mahavishnu Orchestra.
Sure,
I mean, everybody wanted to just hang with him. Jeff Beck, Todd Rundgren. Sure. I was meeting the cream of musical society in my mind.
And of course, when Teaser came out, actually, I think that was right when he joined Deep Purple. So you have to wonder if Tommy had stuck to his solo career, where he would have been.
It's funny, he probably would have been playing with Jocko. The two of them would have ended up together. I always imagined that because they were both kind of just so fearless with their instruments. Mm-hmm. Tommy and Jocko would have been a great combination. Jocko and Pat Metheny were a great combination.
Yes, sure. Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Have you ever gone to Tommy's museum his brother has?
Oh, I was going to mention, right in that last little snippet we just were talking, I wanted to mention, I tell the timeline and the history on my website. It's all kind of been redone in the last couple of months. Have you read it?
It looks good. Yeah, I remember the old one. Yes, now it's sharp looking. Everyone go to StanleySheldon.com.
I wrote some new timeline.
Yes.
And kind of enhanced it a little bit and told more detail about when I met Tommy and then went to Frampton. And, did you read the part where I was recording Tommy's tracking at Electric Lady while we were sifting through Frampton Comes Alive? We didn't know it was going to be Frampton Comes Alive yet. I was doing that in Studio B, tracking with Jan Hammer and Narada Michael Walden in Studio A.
Wow.
At the exact same time. So that's new on my website. I tell that story.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Those were the two people that, more than anybody else in my mind, defined my career. It was happening at the same time.
That's the way it goes, right?
Why do you think they chose you as a player? What did you bring to the table for Tommy and Peter?
It's a good question. I think more than anything, I consider myself a good bass player. I'm not schooled, I don't, over the years I've learned pretty good, the theory. Pretty much. There's always more to learn with music, but I think what I brought to the table more than anything was my sense of time. I was always just locked in on where that one is.
Yeah.
And drummers really like that. And I got to play with 10 of the greatest drummers that have ever lived within about 2 years. When John Semioli was having problems, the first person that was brought in was Gregor Rico, Sly and the Family Stone. Second was Andy Newmark. Third, Rick Marotta. 4, Joe Vitale. 5, Jamie Oldacre. 6, Gary Malabar. I mean, the list just keeps going.
That's a bunch of acts.
Right?
God.
So I've been spoiled with drummers. I don't work around here because there's no drummers.
Yeah. Well, here's a funny thing. We had we interviewed Rudy Sarzo, and he was talking.
I met Rudy finally a couple of years ago.
Yeah, he's a very good guy. Smart. Really smart. But he was talking about, so when he was on the road with Ozzy, he would use a fretless on some of the tunes because he could tune it down. It took 4 months for Ozzy to realize there are no frets on this bass. So this is a preamble to an interesting question. What was Peter's vibe to you? You spent time with Greg Ridley. I was actually in one of the later versions of Humble Pie, and I had to play a fretted bass. But what was Peter's reaction to you using fretless? Was there any hesitation at first?
It was actually his request. Before I auditioned with him, and the reason I got the audition is because Peter had heard the new Barnstorm album with Kenny playing fretless on Rocky Mountain Way and other tracks. And he offered Kenny the gig. And Kenny was either still with Walsh or about to go play with Elton.
Right.
All right.
Okay, right.
He'd been asked to play with Elton. When he got in Elton's band, they asked him to please put the fretless down. but he was using it, and Peter saw it, and it was just a thing back then, fretless bass. Anybody that could play one, they figured the guy had to be pretty good because he can play it in tune. And that's what Peter told me when I auditioned with him at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel. I pushed my little Vibraverb amp up the steps to the elevator on Wilshire Boulevard. He was about, floor 15 or something. So I took my fretless bass and we sat down. You know that song, Money? Bone, I'll give you a bone.
Sure.
Yep.
Take you bone. It's got a slide in it.
Yes.
Right in the song. So Peter, I really was looking for a guy that could play fretless. So when I went to his room, I brought the fretless and we played that song. And we also played a little bit of something else, Baby I Love Your Way or something. He goes, okay, here's my 3 solo albums. I'm going to the dentist in 3 weeks. You have 3 weeks to learn all the songs on the 3 solo albums. And we won't know until you play with John.
Okay. Wow.
It was great. I had 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's not too bad to learn 3 records. But I noticed, I mean, again, as a young player, and I had to devour this album. And, when you were playing high school dances, you had to know every song on Frampton Comes Alive. And you play with a very rhythm and blues feel, which you really didn't hear that much in that type of music. Were some of your influences the R&B greats, the Motown guys, the Muscle Shoals guys?
Yeah, more than ever, and still today, I'd say Jamerson is where I learned how to play. James Jamerson. Yeah. I still copy his style. I play with that raking finger style.
Right, the hook.
So I can get that. I get that percussive, but I've gotten pretty good at it, at channeling Jamerson. But he's my guy, and he was Jocko's guy too.
He was everybody's guy. Yeah,
you got to go through James. Yeah, so Jamerson more than anyone, and McCartney probably.
We interviewed Jerry Jamad a few weeks ago. And,
cool.
He had that very influential video
with him and Jocko.
Yeah. So we chatted about that a little bit. Very interesting guy.
And, of course, Jocko credits Jamad as his main influence. And then when you really dig into it, you go, yep, I could hear that.
Yeah, there's a lot of Jamerson in there, too.
Yes. Yeah. I think, didn't Jerry study with Jamerson or no? I'm thinking of someone else. But,
Chuck Rainey's another one. He's another guy that. He's one of my favorites.
But you also hear a lot of Rocco Prestia in Jocko.
I was just thinking the exact same thing. I mean, Rocco's another guy that when I'm warming up, I like to play some of those, 16th note feels because he gets me up to speed real quick.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, the new guy on the block, obviously, is Joe Dart, who borrows a little bit from Jocko and Rocco Prestia. And it's good to see that he's turning young folks on.
Have you heard, I'm sure you've heard Richard Bona.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
He's unbelievable.
Right. And Thunder.
Yeah, and he sings.
That
was one of the things about Jack Bruce that amazed me is later in his life when he just started playing fretless exclusively, he was singing along with it. Jesus Christ.
He was great. I mean, such a great bass player. That live Cream album, it kind of changed the world, especially the live one. But he was great.
Yeah,
Peter got his first solo album was pretty amazing as well. Songs for
right. He was a jazz player, right?
Yeah. For you and I, we grew up. We're just a couple years apart, but Tom's the young one, so he's talking about "Frampton Comes Alive," where you have to turn it up right side up, though.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you. That's it. There you go. Notice folks like you and I. There was that Humble Pie live at the Fillmore, the Allman Brothers live at the Fillmore with Berry Oakley. He would have been an interesting player on fretless too, I think.
Sure. Trying to think who else. Oh, another one of my favorites that I can't leave out is Dee Murray. When it was the Elton John trio.
Yeah.
Dee Murray was playing fretless bass.
Yeah.
So he was really a major impetus for me I can go ahead and get one. I can do that too.
Yeah, 11/17/70. That is just such a remarkable album. I've actually had contact with Dee's widow. We've been trying to do these little campaigns to get him recognized in the sideman category for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
He was really a great bass player. Right?
Yeah. And of course, that you're contemporary.
Was it alcohol with him? Do you think?
No, he died of cancer. Dee.
Could it be liver cancer?
Well, that I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know any details either.
But when you do other session work like you did Warren and Joe Bonamassa, what's your approach to these guys? Because they have quite a bit of a history behind them. Do you go and research the bass players that they've played with, or do you is it more about bringing your own thing to the table?
Well, I like to bring my own thing, but I also like to be very secure in the fact that I know the song and that I own it, that I've learned the parts of whoever played. Like when we did the Warren gig, it's when I met Waddy Wachtel. I'd played with Rick Marotta before, and that was Warren's. It was really a great band. Me, Waddy,
that was Ronan, yeah.
Yeah, basically that's how Ronan came together when we all met playing on the Excitable Boy tour.
Right.
So when I learned those songs that on that album, which every track is a gem,
It's like a
excitable.
greatest hits album, pretty much.
It's unbelievable. You can hear the whole thing straight through. And a lot of that was Bob Glob, who's a friend, masterful bass player. So I learned a lot of his parts. Kenny Edwards had played on that record too, Linda's bass player.
Yep.
And, Waddy, I think, was writing a lot of the bass notes for some of the things that Kenny played on Tenderness on the Block, really kind of basics, really well-written lines.
Right.
So it's all kind of laid out when I got there. I just put my little feel to it. When we did, there are some great live recordings of that band playing at the Roxy one night. We got the whole set and it sounds amazing. I need to get that onto my website.
Right. I think Warren did a live record, but I think that might have been a couple of years after the tour you guys did.
He went through a lot of different players between then and now, but he should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame too.
Yeah. This is very true.
For what it's worth. Yes, exactly. When Frampton Comes Alive came out, and of course Teaser, there was a platform known as FM radio. That's how we used to hear music. I don't know, David, do you remember FM radio?
No.
No, I've heard about that thing.
What are your thoughts, Sheldon, on streaming now? Because when I think of the records you played on, I always think in terms of an album, start to finish. And now we live in a world of playlists. Do you think the album format is still relevant in the 21st century?
Boy, it really isn't. But I think to people of a certain age, like for you and me, us guys, we still
That's three of us. Yeah.
Sometimes I like to put on a whole side. I don't do it as much as I used to, but I still enjoy it. If it's a record like, whatever it might be, Steely Dan, whoever. If it's a great record and every song is great, you don't want to hear just one. You want to hear a whole side, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too. Our show, one of the obstacles of a lot of satellite music now and internet radio is you're only allowed to play 4 tunes per artist.
Really?
So it gives us a lot of leverage with you. We can, we got a lot of stuff. But the point I'm making is that you said it earlier. Oh, you can listen to the Warren Zevon record from beginning to end. Well, we used to think like that. We would listen to records. So sometimes when I'm listening to the radio, satellite radio, you want to hear the next song. Do you know what I mean? You're used to hearing here, there, everywhere, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you have it in your head. You've memorized what's coming up next. And also, it was a whole gestalt thing. You'd have the album cover in your hand, reading about it, who's playing on each track. And it was just pouring over this. I mean, I really miss those days of studying, everything about a record.
Yeah. Great artwork, great everything. Tom, did you know about albums? You're younger than I.
Yes, I did. This was my record collection. Well, let's raise the bar a little bit. Ringo and Paul are going back in the studio, and they're going to AI John Lennon and George Harrison. What are your thoughts on AI now? I mean, it's interesting. David and I were talking. There's a guy on YouTube called Nothing Is Real. And he has been AIing Beatles. He's been putting George Harrison's voice on an Oasis track. He had John Lennon singing, Paul McCartney singing Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. Whereas AI is going to be, an artist unto itself. Now, I think what McCartney is doing, from what I've read, is now it's easier to get John Lennon's voice off the cassette that they had, because that was the technology they have.
I think, it's if Paul McCartney makes a record and evidently they're going to be able to simulate John's voice, and Paul will probably write some melodies for him, and it'll be John's voice. It'll probably be magnificent. Yeah. But, I don't think everybody that uses it, I don't think it's going to turn out so great, but it could. I mean, it could go a lot of different directions, but I think what McCartney's going to do may be a trendsetter and kind of set the bar.
Yeah. I'm looking for an article right now, Tom and Sheldon, where I think it was the Grammy Association saying that they are not allowing, I can't find it here, oh well,
they're not
allowing AI to be utilized. So I guess there'll be no Grammys anymore.
They think it's cheating, I guess.
Not to confuse it with auto-tune, which of course is not cheating.
Right.
Well,
Yes.
you come from the days of analog recording when you had to be a proficient player. I mean, Pro Tools, yes, it's nice to be able to record an album in your living room. But when you went into the studio, how did you handle the pressure? Because, you had to get it in 2 or 3 takes because they had to leave the other tracks over for the horns and the vocals.
Like I say, man, I was lucky. I got to do the few records with the greatest drummers ever. And, we didn't, believe it or not, guys, on some records we did use it, but on those, Frampton Comes Alive, the Tommy Bolin teaser album, we never used a click track. Well, everybody was hired because of their sense of time.
Yeah.
And John Semioli, I got to add, had an exquisite sense of time, and we never needed a click track with John.
Yeah, yeah.
Even on the studio albums,
I played with John too. I think some of his best work was that first Buzzy Linhart record.
That's a great record. I'm glad you
Isn't
mentioned
it?
Tommy Bolin.
Luthra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I loved that record. And then John, when you hear him on Hello, It's Me with Todd Rundgren, I mean, it's
Right.
an amazing track, largely because of the drums. The whole track is incredible.
Yeah.
But listen to it again. Listen to John's feel. His cymbal work. It's exquisite.
Yeah, and that's something that's really very, very obvious in the Frampton Comes Alive, the way he hits the bells of the cymbals.
He and I, man, I really miss John, and I got to play with a lot of drummers because of his problems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But he was one of a kind, and every drummer, that came in after him knew it. Well, especially because Peter was asking all these great drummers, just play what John, can you play like John did? And usually they just get pissed off. Gregor Rico lasted about 2 weeks. Andy Newmark, 1 gig. Murata lasted a little longer. Vitali probably lasted longer than any with Peter.
But even though, because I think the time period that I played with him, he hit it, but he was definitely having issues. He still played great.
Yeah. He was high most of the time. He always was high. And, I'm joking about it, but so was I.
Yeah.
And on Frampton Comes Alive even. I'm almost glad I didn't know we were recording that. I tell that story too. Peter had hired the Wally Hyder remote truck.
Right.
And I was in my sweet spot, high as a kite. And I don't think any of us were thinking about the fact that we were making a record. We were too concerned. It was our first headline gig. That gig at Winterland was Peter's first headline spot. Bill Graham gave it to him. And so we were just kind of focused on doing a good show.
Yeah.
We just caught lightning in a bottle that night.
Yeah, it's interesting how the band swings. I mean, it's, some of the performances, you can hear the push and pull between the band, but it was really luck. I mean, you just caught you guys on a hot night. Did you ever think that when that record came out that it would have the impact that it did?
I was trying. This is another story I tell. I was the guy that was advising Peter not to do a live album. Said, we got to go in the studio, man, make a really polished. That was my advice. He didn't listen to me much after that.
All right. Note to self: do not take career advice from Stanley on recording.
Yeah. But Peter had experience with live albums, and Dee Anthony was his manager with Humble Pie.
Right.
Rocking the Fillmore.
Yeah.
So he'd done it before.
Yeah, it's amazing that he caught lightning in a bottle twice. But I think the problem with Frampton Comes Alive, it was so damn big. And it was so many years in the making that, they just wanted him to repeat another record the next year. And you just can't. But that's how the business was in those days. You had to put out a record a year.
Well, unfortunately for Peter, and he tells the story better than I because he's the one that it affected more poignantly. But it was so successful, largest selling live album in history. It set a new trend. And how do you follow that? So he tried with I'm and You, and then he got a car accident. He couldn't play, and then he made that horrible movie, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Right.
Oh,
now,
boy.
You tell a story on the website where you advised him against Sgt. Pepper. Now, there you go, David. He's redeemed himself because that would have been good career.
He should have listened to me and Bob Mayo and John Samos were all three telling Peter, please don't do it. You're not an actor.
But he redeemed himself in what was it, Spinal Tap? Not Spinal Tap. What was the movie? The Cameron Crowe movie, right? He was
that was great. Yeah. Peter redeemed himself with that one, and he tells that story. He goes, "I was involved in the worst rock movie ever made and the best one."
That's it. There's a balance there.
Well, interestingly, Peter's hitting the road today. Is his first gig.
Yeah, that's amazing that he's
out for the summer.
Right.
How's he feeling?
I think he's just lucky that his fingers aren't as affected as some of his like leg muscles a little. It's hard for him, I think, to stand.
Now he's going to sit down and perform.
Well, I'm kind of curious because he did on his last tour over to.
Right.
He was doing. He went back to Europe to make up rain checks because of COVID.
Right.
So he sat down for that entire tour, and so did everybody in the band in solidarity, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know. Peter Barron was talking to me. I'm actually going to be you on July 7th and 8th at some Middleton, New York festival. Well, it's okay. I don't mind. I am using a rosewood fretless, so there's a little bit of a difference there. But he said that he was at John's funeral, and Peter was there, Peter Frampton. And
are you talking about John Reagan?
John Reagan, yes. We had him on the show. Yeah, we had John on the show.
Yeah, John was a great guy. I miss him.
A true great soul. But apparently Peter was walking with a cane.
Mm.
Yeah, I've seen him do that. To tell you the truth, guys, I haven't seen Peter much. It's been since about 2017, and we went our separate ways, but I always follow what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he's sometimes with a cane, but his fingers, I guess, are okay still. It's his long muscles that got affected more than anything with this rare disease he has.
David, you will be paying homage to Stanley's work on Frampton Comes Alive, but what about the stage wear, David? Can you
No, I will not.
No kimonos?
No kimonos?
No kimonos. No kimono. Yes, no kimono. But
hey man, they were hip back then.
And they were comfortable. They looked comfortable.
Sure. I even had platform shoes, but I won't wear them either.
Well, have you guys heard about the Humble Pie Legacy tour?
I was on the last part of it, and I guess your guy Jim's singing lead
got a new unit, I think. Well, he's our singer in our band Vinyl Machine. It's the same singer, Jim Stapley. Yep. So he's going to do the Humble Pie Legacy singing, and hopefully, our band Vinyl Machine. We've got a roster of hits that's really fun to play.
Yeah, tell us about that. How did that come together?
Well, Joe Vitale and I got on the horn, and we were just talking because Waddy and those guys have a band called The Immediate Family, and they they play the hits of James and Henley and the people they recorded with. Warren, they do some Zevon songs.
Right.
So Joe and I just said, hey, we can do the same thing, man, and we can get a singer that's even a stronger singer, maybe. So we got Jim. We asked, we went through a few guys before we found Jim Stapley, and he's perfect. He's British. He's a little younger than the rest of us, so he's got good frontman chops. And Joe Vitale Jr. is in the band. But for the songs, and we have Dwayne Shockwell. He's not that well known, but he played with Glenn Frey and McCartney on one little tour, I think. So we have a lot of Eagles, Crosby, Stills, Nash. We do Life in the Fast Lane. We do Southern Cross. We do Mr. Soul. We do, we can do the Buffalo Springfield because Joe was the drummer in that incarnation.
Right, sure.
When Neil left after 3 shows, remember? So we're doing Buffalo Springfield, Crosby, Stills, Eagles, Frampton, Faces, because Stapley played in the Faces with Kenny Jones.
Oh, right, the last version of it with Rick Wills, I guess it was.
Right, exactly.
Around that time, yeah.
So Jim Stapley, he's kind of the sine qua non in our band because he can sing all these songs. The set list is really fun. Great songs.
Now, are you going to be coming east?
Well, hopefully we've got an agency, but they're having trouble selling it right now. We may have to change our name. I'm not sure. There's a Vinyl Kings out of Nashville that's session guys doing the same thing. It's a hard sell mainly because we are not a tribute band.
Right.
It might be easier if we were, because those tribute bands are they're the shit right now. Evidently.
That's what I was going to say. Well, there's the trademark bands and the tribute bands, and these tribute bands are pulling down like serious money in In
it's
Vegas,
the biggest
Atlantic
market
City?
because they can do it for a little cheaper than, the big names.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a huge market now. But so you see what I'm saying? We're a tough sell because we're not a tribute band. We're the guys that actually played on the
That's
on
what
the
I'm
record.
saying. You're the real guys.
But it's hard to get that across, in
Yeah.
a name. Tell me what you think of this name, Ex-Boss.
Ex-boss.
What do
Okay.
you think?
What's the connotation?
Oh,
We're playing the songs of our ex-bosses.
Oh, okay. I get it. All right.
So you didn't get it right off the bat.
I didn't get it right off the bat.
We need a new name, I think.
Tom, did you freeze?
No, I didn't
Oh,
freeze.
it's obvious. It's obvious. It's like they're playing the music of their ex-bosses.
Okay.
My only problem with that name is I got it. Tom didn't get it, and I think a lot of folks won't get it.
Yeah.
That's been. I've asked a few friends, just like we just did as an experiment. So I think we need something more obvious than Vinyl Machine. Just for me, it's okay, but not great. That name.
Yeah. Well, what does Jeff Gans do, David? The Hitmakers, isn't that his band?
Right,
Hitmakers?
that's the Hitmakers.
Then,
but that's bullshit too, really. That's lame.
You know what it is, guys? We've got something that I think it's going to sell eventually. We have to build it, and we want to do the corporate market. That's where it's going to be our cash cow.
Yeah, sure.
And once we get the first corporate gig for decent money where we can all fly in and do it, then I think word will start getting around of who's in this band.
I think you'd be better off, Sheldon, doing something that is reminiscent of Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp, only because that's really when you go to a corporate event, you're giving everything except the ex-boss. So it's a high cachet. You might want to think in terms of that.
Well, we tell stories too. We tell vignettes about our bosses. So that's another plus. It's really fun. We did one gig in Ohio, in Cleveland.
Okay.
To kick it off, and we sold out a little theater that the Vitalis where they live in Canton, in Akron, and so we sold it out and we rehearsed. We were ready, and it came off pretty well. And we told a few stories, a little spiel in between a couple of the tunes. Vitali wrote "Life's Been Good."
Yeah.
Basically, so that's in our repertoire. Rocky Mountain Way. So we tell the stories a little.
Maybe you should be the elder statesman. What is it like to be an elder statesman now? You were the young hotshot guys, and now
I kind of dig it.
Yeah.
as long as I'm still healthy,
Isn't that the amazing thing about the music industry is that you think when you're in your teens and 20s, I'll be done around 30, 35.
At least.
And here we are, healthy, maybe not as wealthy, but wise.
Well, you guys were among the fortunate few. Anybody our age, and Tom's a little younger, right?
Yeah, I'm the young chippy. I'm 63. I'm the kid.
We got a decade.
Actually, yesterday was his birthday.
Look
Happy
at that.
birthday.
Thank you. Me,
Belated.
Paul McCartney, and Carl Radle, although those guys sold more records than I did. But yes, it is. We're noticing that it's great to see artists. Even the Stones are still out there. Sir Paul is out there. Van Morrison is out there. It's like,
It gives me hope as a player, as long as I can stay healthy. The odds are increasing that I can get work because it's a diminishing roster of people that can do certain gigs. You know?
Yeah.
It's getting smaller every day. I'm ready to play.
Yeah, we'll promote it. But it was good to see Tony Levin back on the road with Peter Gabriel.
Oh man, unbelievable. Tony's I've always worshipped him from put him on a pedestal because he's that great.
Yeah, we had him on the show. We had him on the show as well. Let me throw this question. David and I did a bass forum recently. David, who do we have? We had Ron Carter. We had
Gary Carr.
We had Gary Carr, the great classical player. We had Dave Swift, who you may know from Jules Holland, later with Jules Holland. He's been on our show a few times. And who else? I think we had Larry Grenadier.
Oh, we had Benny Rita.
Oh, God. Larry Grenadier is one of my all-time favorite jazz players, man. The stuff Brad Meldau, get out of here.
Oh, yeah.
You should check out Larry's solo record.
The Gleaners.
I will do that.
It's remarkable. It's called The Gleaner.
Who did I see? I saw him with Brad Meldau.
Well, we had a very interesting conversation with him during COVID. He did a solo performance from the Village Vanguard. Now, The Gleaner is a solo bass record, and we asked him about the prospect that can streaming concerts be viable platforms, sort of a hybrid between the record or the streaming service and the actual live performance. We also had on our show Rod Argent and Colin Blunstone from the Zombies, who did a streaming show from Abbey Road. And it was cool as a fan here in America to go inside Abbey Road. And
wow, yeah.
You know, the Zombies were able to bring an orchestra into Abbey Road to do some of their Oracle, Odyssey and Oracle, where they couldn't afford to do that on the road. It's too expensive. What are your thoughts on that about streaming concerts? You think that's going to come, you know, it'd be a viable hybrid between the two?
I think there's a good likelihood of that happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost inevitable. It looks like with the state of the art being what it is, it's easy to stream it out and just do it live like that, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it's getting more and more expensive to tour. I mean, obviously with COVID restrictions and other restrictions, put a band out on the road isn't cheap anymore.
Well, and that's why these tribute bands are making hay, because they can go out for a tenth of the price that Elton John goes out for. So people are thinking, hey, he'll play Elton songs, and people won't know the difference. And sadly, that's a large percentage of the audience doesn't give a flying frick, you know, if the Journey singer is the real guy or not, you know, they just don't care. And with the Foreigner, not one original member. Thank you very much.
That's right.
So I don't know. The tribute bands I don't think I want to be in a tribute band, but I kind of like our concept. And who knows, maybe we can do our gig and stream it. I don't know. Right now, I would just like to get a couple of corporate gigs and just go out and keep playing. You know, hopefully I'll get to do a couple more Grand Funk shows, depending on Mel. Mel's healthy.
Yes.
He's down to 4 packs a day, so he's doing better.
Well, I got to tell you my Don Brewer story.
Okay, you tell yours, and I'll tell you what.
All right.
All right. So I was actually, Rick Morato was living in the building as well. 68th and Broadway, the Dorchester Tower. Who else was living in that? Denny Sewell was living in the building. And so it's Randall's Island Pop Festival. And oh, God, it's got to be 69. So I walk in the lobby, and there's this guy with a giant afro, or in his case, you know, whatever it was, like this, nodding out, because Terry Knight lived on the 29th floor. So who knows who else was there, but Brewer was nodding out in my lobby.
You know, those guys are so great. I've got to show you a picture. Maybe you'll be able to see it. Can you see this photo?
Oh, yeah, there you are.
Well, so that's what Brewer looks like now. He's still got, you know, his golden locks have gone gray. It used to be dark. He's a powerhouse still on drums. I don't think I've ever had as much fun playing with a drummer in a rock format.
Wow.
Than Brewer, because I'm used to pushing, you know, my drummer, whoever I'm playing with. I like to be the guy that pushes a little bit, so it breathes back and forth. And usually, it really bugs me if a drummer can't hold it back. Wow. I like them to hold me back, and then you get that tension. But with Brewer, it's just the opposite. He leads that fucking band. I'm freaking band. Can I say that on this?
Sure,
it's internet.
Yeah, it's internet. Anything goes.
Yeah, normally I say that a lot more frequently, that word, but it's just Don Brewer he's unbelievable. You guys have seen him play, right?
Yeah, of course. I saw him back in the day. Yeah.
Recently?
Not recently, no. Back in the day.
Well, remember that 20-minute solo he used to do?
Yeah, yes. TNUC. Right. Yes,
he just had to stop doing it. Up until last year, he had some heart surgery. So it was recommended that he not do that 20-minute solo anymore, because he would put everything into it, just like he did when he was 19 years old.
Yeah.
And it's a great band. Max Carl fronting it. That's how I got in, because Max Carl and I played with Tommy Bolin together. Max just lives up in Omaha, just an hour, 2 hours north of here.
All right.
And Max I'm just saying he's one of my dearest friends. So when they needed a bass player, Mel hadn't missed a gig in 49 years. So I got to come in and play with him for 3 months. And then I got to do it again this year. Just a couple of months ago, he got COVID. So I got I got to go do 3 gigs again.
Kind of a challenge playing Mel's lines, because they're really the foundation of the song.
Yeah,
they're not traditional. They're not traditional bass lines. They're not traditional bass parts.
And he plays with a pick But when I first started listening to the notes he was playing, and I think this is what Max thought about recommending someone to fill in for Mel, because they were at their wits' end. They didn't know who they were. So Max said, "Yeah, I know someone that can do it." So Max must have heard, whether you guys know it or not. I'm gonna point it out. Mel listened to James Jamerson a lot.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So he attacks with a pick the same notes that we feel it exactly the same. It's just we attack it differently.
Okay.
Me with my finger funk style, but I learned a lot. I really had fun learning his notes because they're similar. They're similar to what I would play as well.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about those first two albums, it's really soul rock.
Yes.
Exactly, and that's what I loved, and that's why I'm glad Max was prescient enough to say, "Hey, Stanley could do that." He comes from that same kind of background.
Yeah. Now, David plays a 6-string, and we've done some shows together, bass duet, and you graduated to the 5-string.
Yeah, 5's enough for me. I don't really solo up high like some of those guys do, but I love having the low notes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I have a D-tuner on my low B, so I can actually go down to a low A and then a low G. And I have some equipment that can reproduce that. I mean, it's not something for, general consumption in a band, but as a last note, you can make your audience shit.
Yeah.
anything lower than that B, even B flat or A, you're not really hearing a note. You're just feeling the room shake, and you're hearing a rumble.
Do not try this at home. Well, the nice thing about the 5-string is obviously you don't have to drop tune. You don't have to do the drop D. Plus, you can move on the fretboard more horizontally, which is a little bit more. You can do a little bit more.
I've got a lot of different basses, but I fell in love with my Warwick 5-string fretted. Yeah, and that's the one. It's been my workhorse bass for all the gigs I do. Every now and then I'll pick up the fretless, but I love the Warwick. Jack Bruce played a Warwick too.
Yes, he did. Right. Yeah, for many years. Yeah,
so I love Warwicks.
We still have
there's not a lot of us that do.
Well, I got to tell you, I was in a band with a woman named Robin Beck, and she was very, very popular in Europe. So I had a few different Warwicks, and the Streamer series and I had a fretless Streamer, and really a wonderful sounding instrument.
They're well built. They use beautiful wood, or they used to. I don't know where they're getting their tropical hardwood now, but man, the ones they built are gorgeous. And brass frets.
Yeah, nice weight. The weight distribution, it's ergonomically, it's nice.
They're well balanced. That's true.
My only thing is I prefer my basses passive now. So
it's interesting. You're such an aggressive person, David, that you would prefer a passive.
It's true. Well, I'm passive aggressive. That's basically it.
You guys are like a Borscht team.
Yes, we.
That's it.
Without the Borscht, unfortunately. But all right. Well, Stanley, thanks for being on the show. You are in a very high esteemed league of bass players. We talked to some of our heroes. We had Leo Lyons on.
Tell me more about, before you go, Larry Grenadier. What's his solo album called?
It's called The Gleaners.
I'll send you a link to our podcast and our videos with him.
Yeah, I mean, I feel fortunate. I am in rarefied air with some of these people you've mentioned.
All right, on the show. You and me both. And you know what? Maybe we'll have you and Larry on a show together, because a lot of times we get bass players from different walks of life to get together. And yeah, we definitely have you and Larry on. He started off as an electric bass player.
I hear a very percussive style with him. I'm sure he knows who James Jamerson is too.
Well, I'll bet you he grew up. We're the same age, so he had to have learned a few licks from Frampton Comes Alive, because we all had to. That was a rite of passage. Like David, you had to learn Humble Pie at the Fillmore. I had to learn.
That's right.
Frampton Comes Alive. So
now I've got to learn the entire Frampton Comes Alive thing for this thing with Peter Barron.
Is Frampton going to show up and give it his stamp of approval?
If he's on tour, I don't think so.
He's out. I know he's going to show up, or at least he's given his blessing to the Humble Pie Legacy thing.
Yeah. And why not? Sure. Absolutely.
I think Jim's probably a much better component of that, than just having a lead singer up front. I think it's a smarter visual too.
Jim's a really good guitar player too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I went on your site and I was listening to the vinyl machine, and when his name came up, I went, oh, that's the guy who's doing it. He's a perfect choice.
Yeah.
He is really. We were lucky to get him, and I hope we get a gig and actually have something to do. You know.
Yeah.
You and me both. So all right, Stanley. Thanks for talking. We'll let you know when this airs, and we'll send you all the links, and I'll send you that. We'll send you that Larry Grenadier stuff.
Great. Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I really
all right.
enjoyed
Thanks
this.
for being a guest.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you.
Peace
Bye-bye
out.
now.
Bye-bye.
All right, David, fabulous conversation with Mr. Stanley Sheldon. Let's talk about the Stanley Sheldon playlist, which you have so expertly curated.
Before we get into the songs we're using,
Yes.
one of the things that we cannot do on our podcast is play music. So Tom and I, in our infinite wisdom, decided to put together playlists of all the songs we've played on the show, which is www.cygnusradio.com. So if you go to our podcast and click on playlists, it will send you to Tidal.com. Why do we use Tidal.com? Confidentially, folks, it sounds better than Spotify. Yes, it does. It's a better quality show. With that in mind, if you click on that playlist for Stanley Sheldon, voila, you're going to hear Tommy Bolin doing Flying Fingers.
Yeah.
Jaco Pastorius doing Donna Lee. Pat Metheny doing Midsummer's Night Dream. Coupled by Peter Frampton, Do You Feel Like I Do? I Give You Money. Then we talk a little bit about Rocco, and we got What Is Hip. Then we talk a little bit about Elton John's live album, and we do Amarina.
Ooh.
Then we talk about the wonderful drummer from Peter Frampton's band, John Siomis, and we come up with a Buzzy Linhart tune by the inimitable Fred Neil called The Bag I'm In.
Yeah.
And then we close that with a couple other songs with Stanley and Peter, which is Won't You Be My Friend and I Can't Stand It No More.
All right. Now, David, you played in a Peter Frampton repertory ensemble with Peter Barron, and you had to learn some of Stanley Sheldon's line. Relate that experience to us, David.
After looking at a number of the recordings that Stanley did, it became obvious that, well, I better get myself a fretless 4-string bass.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you guys know, I play 6-string, and I'm proud of it. So I picked up this Tony Franklin fretless bass, and I got to tell you something. Fender has done a remarkable job. The neck is fantastic. The body is fantastic. However, me being me, I changed the pickups. I changed the tuning machines. I changed the bridge. I even changed the tip of the toggle switch, and I even changed the backplate. Why? Because that's what I do, because I just like basses to be mine.
Right.
In any event, the bass sounded great. The thing about Stanley is he was not a slider. So ultimately, you play as precisely as possible. And if the guitar player is in tune, no one blames the bass player.
Yeah, Stanley was that type of guy, right? He was not a glissando. He didn't overuse the glissando, which a lot of fretless bass players tend to do, but Stanley was pretty much on target. And it certainly had an R&B feel, as did Rick Wills, another friend of the show, who Stanley replaced after Rick Wills shot his mouth off about the quality of Peter Frampton's lyrics. So if you listen...
Well, you wonder why people don't realize that it's very, very possible that there's an open mic around. Think about all of the open mic faux pas since the Rick Wills incident.
Yeah.
From politicians to celebrities, every imbecile on the planet.
Yes, David. And remember, no matter who you vote for, the government always gets in, right?
Yeah, amen to that.
Amen to that. And of course, I think he mentions that Kenny Passarelli, another fretless pioneer, actually recommended Stanley Sheldon for the gig. But of course, you heard that on the show. But let's get to our Stanley Sheldon playlist, shall we?
Hey, and folks, next week, we've got a very special show with a very special individual, pianist Matthew Shipp. What's very interesting about it, we spent more time talking about wrestling and boxing than music, which is kind of an interesting go, but that's what you come to expect from Thomas and myself.
There you go. Notes from an artist, notes from a wrestler. All right, let's get to Stanley Sheldon.
See you next week.